I saw my life branching out before me like the green fig tree in the story. From the tip of every branch, like a fat purple fig, a wonderful future beckoned and winked. One fig was a husband and a happy home and children, and another fig was a famous poet, and another fig was a brilliant professor, and another fig was E.G., the amazing editor, and another fig was Europe and Africa and South America. And another fig was Constantine and Socrates and Attila and a pack of other lovers with queer names and offbeat professions. And another fig was an Olympic lady crew champion. And beyond and above these figs were many more figs I couldn't quite make out. I saw myself sitting in the crotch of this fig tree, starving to death, just because I couldn't make up my mind which of the figs I would choose. I wanted each and every one of them, but choosing one meant losing all the rest. And as I sat there, unable to decide, the figs began to wrinkle and go black, and one by one, they plopped to the ground at my feet. Excerpt from The Bell Jar from Sylvia Plath. Okay, listen. I'm going to keep it real with you. I've never read The Bell Jar from Sylvia Plath. I actually have never read a book from Sylvia Plath at all. Maybe I should. I'll look into it. But I came across this excerpt from one of her books a handful of years ago, and I don't think anything has ever really resonated with me as strongly as this particular passage did. As you're going to learn through this podcast, this passage almost perfectly defines every single day of my existence. And I'd be willing to wager that a lot of you can probably relate to it too. My name is Robert Doty, and I'll be your resident disembodied voice for the next 20 minutes, or maybe the next 3 minutes if you have a similar attention span to mine, or just don't feel like you're going to vibe with the podcast. That's okay. It's not going to be for everyone. Full disclosure, this was actually supposed to be the first episode of the podcast. I originally envisioned this being 2 episodes that sort of make an introduction to who I am and why I'm making this podcast in the first place. And that's still what this episode is about, but I love my dramatic flair. I saw an opportunity to start with some high drama, and I jumped at it. Sorry, not sorry. That said, it's still really important to me that you know who I am. That is, after all, the cornerstone of connection. And while it's great that you're listening to the podcast, I feel like unless you know who I am and what my motivations really are, there's probably going to be some sort of disconnect. The original script had a little joke about this kind of being like the awkward first date. And I think that joke probably still stands. We just have to pretend that I kind of trauma dumped on you over appetizers. All right? Okay. Let's get into it. This is episode 2 of the I Hope I'm Wrong podcast, Shapes and Colors. As I said before, my name is Robert. I just turned 38 in August of 2025. Whatever society deems the standards of success for a 38-year-old man are, it's a pretty safe bet that I'm the polar opposite. I've never been married, I don't have kids, I don't own a house, I don't have a savings account. Well, not a savings account with money in it. I don't have a stable career. Hell, I barely have an unstable career. I have a car payment that's way too high. I am around 4 months out of an almost 6-year long relationship, navigating the shittiest breakup of my life. I'm still recovering from a pretty significant knee surgery, and my job actually shut down about a week ago as of this recording. Oh, and I had to move back in with my parents at 38 years old. Awesome, right? I also happen to have a neat little cocktail of neurodivergent conditions. The star of the show, of course, is ADHD. That's why we're all here. That's kind of the point of the podcast, is navigating life primarily with ADHD. But there's a supporting cast made up of RSD, or rejection sensitive dysphoria, general anxiety, some pretty significant attachment wounds, and I'm pretty sure my therapist told me I have CPTSD as well, but who knows? If it's difficult to keep up with this little Long Island iced tea of mental issues, don't worry. They're not going anywhere, and they'll definitely be coming up in the podcast. Now, if that overwhelmingly cheerful introduction didn't clue you in, this is not one of those podcasts where I'm going to fondly tell you about how shitty things were for me 10 years ago and how great they are now. It's a podcast about a guy sitting in the rubble of basically his entire life, wondering what the fuck is going on, and hoping that maybe his story can help someone else who might find themselves in a similar position. I think that all too often in today's culture, a majority of the information that we're being subjected to online is really coming from one of two types of people. Either somebody who's on the other side of their storm, and we have a difficult time really relating to, or somebody who has not even approached their own storm and should definitely not be giving advice to anybody, ever, under any circumstances. Seriously. That's why it was so important for me to begin this podcast before I was really even ready to. I'm not healed. I'm not an expert on these topics. I'm not a doctor or a psychologist or someone who has it all figured out. I'm terrified. I'm hurting. I'm lost. I'm still not sure of what the fuck just happened to me over the last 4 months, and I sure as shit don't know what's going to happen over the next 4. But I think if you can relate to being in this situation, or even just part of it, this is probably the version of me you need to be hearing from right now. Maybe what you need is to know that there's someone else out there trying to become the best version of themselves during the worst chapter of their life, too. And if you're taking the time to listen to me ramble on in these podcasts, I think it's really only fair that you're able to have a general idea of who I am. The good, the bad, and the ugly. That doesn't mean I'm going to divulge every dirty little detail, but I also wouldn't want anyone thinking that I have my shit more together than I do either. So at the end of the day, I guess I hope this podcast is about connection. I'm really only learning how to connect with people in healthy ways. So hopefully if you and I can connect a little bit for this podcast, maybe that can help you and I learn how to connect better with the people in our lives. Now that you know who I am a little bit, I also want to briefly discuss the particular conditions that I have so we're all on the same page. The story that I'm telling with the early episodes of this podcast is about navigating a breakup and having your life destabilized kind of out of the blue. But I think in broader terms, this podcast is really just about navigating life with these conditions. And even though the chapter of my life I find myself in is only one chapter, these conditions really do affect my perception of every single day and every single moment of my life. There are also a lot of people who might have some of these conditions, and maybe they've never even heard of them. Maybe they have no idea why they are the way they are, and that's something I can certainly relate to. So maybe if you're listening to this episode and finding yourself relating to some of these things, maybe it'll help you understand yourself a little bit better too. So, for starters, I would say probably the most influential condition I have is ADHD. Long story short, ADHD is a developmental disorder that basically screws up the way your prefrontal cortex operates. The prefrontal cortex is basically in charge of all of the responsible adult things, so not having that part of your brain work the correct way has some pretty obvious drawbacks when you're a 38-year-old man. Emotional regulation, impulse control, memory function, building routines. These are all areas that I struggle with at my baseline because of the way ADHD chemically affects my brain. I would say the next most influential condition I have is generalized anxiety. I don't really ever relax. I would say the closest thing I can really do to relaxing is dissociating. Usually, when I'm playing a video game or something, I can kind of zone in on it and just forget real life for a little while. But a lot of the time, that really just ends up stressing me out too. My brain is trying to do 50 things all at the same time, all of the time. And half of these things are completely imagined scenarios that have not and probably will not ever happen in the first place. The third condition is something I'm just starting to learn about, and that is RSD, or rejection sensitive dysphoria. Basically, what this is a really fancy way of saying that I handle rejection pretty poorly. Not in the way you see memes of online, like dudes crashing out when girls aren't into them or anything like that, but more in the way that very little and seemingly unimportant things can actually have a really negative effect on my mental state. One of the sillier ways that this presents itself, for example, is that if I'm drinking or eating something that is really good, that I really like, I will often try to offer a taste to someone I am with, whether that's friends or a partner or a parent or whatever. And when you or they tell me, no thanks, I don't want to try that, RSD makes me take that very personally. And it legitimately kind of feels like you just fucking hate me in that moment. And now that I'm learning about this, I kind of understand that obviously that's not reality, that's just a thought process, but it's very interesting in the ways that it manifests itself and the ways you kind of catch it flaring up within you. I also have both pretty severe attachment issues and CPTSD. What both of these basically boil down to, and we'll talk about them a little more in depth, but basically it just means that since I was a small child, a lot of the people around me were just the right amount of asshole that I didn't necessarily ever recognize it as harmful or abusive, but it still left a profoundly negative imprint on how I interact with the world and the people around me. This has also led to a low sense of self worth, being hypercritical of myself, and people pleasing behaviors. The kind of funny bit is that this cocktail of issues actually makes me doing a podcast really ironic. See, I don't really believe my story is all that important. I absolutely hate the voice that I'm using to tell that story. And if I can get past those two things, I also don't want to tell my story because my vulnerability has always been received negatively. And the first time somebody says something bad about this podcast, it's gonna feel like I'm being shot in the chest. Even if I manage to get past all of that, there's a really good chance that I'm gonna stall forever because I can't really stay organized or focused enough to actually execute on things that I want to do. Sounds pretty fun, right? But I think that's part of why I want to do this. It is fucking terrifying. It's like going skydiving to get over a fear of heights or sleeping in a tarantula cage to get over arachnophobia. But also, I know what it's like to not tell my story. I know what it's like to hate my voice, and I know how it feels to not follow through with something I know I want to do. And I don't think I want to feel those things anymore. So here we are, audibly uncomfortable and doing this shit anyways. These particular conditions do have a sort of upside to them, if you can call it that. My brain sort of works in shapes and colors. It disregards a lot of the side noise and really just tries to focus in on the meat of an issue. That means that when we're talking, I'll probably miss about 80% of what you're saying, but I will usually understand the point you're making, sometimes before you even get there. I might even be able to finish your thoughts for you. And it's pretty often that I can read between the lines of what someone is saying versus what they're actually feeling. Part of this is the gift and curse of what you would call hypervigilance. Because I've always been unable to depend on people being honest or forthright with me about their feelings, I have developed an extreme sensitivity to peripheral information. I notice little changes in your routines, the little changes in your tone, inconsistencies in your behavior and your words. In other words, I don't really trust people to tell me how they're actually feeling or to even really know how they're feeling. So I'm always scanning for signs to inform me instead. This creates what almost feels like a clairvoyance at times. I can sense that something is wrong long before it's ever really brought to the light. I can usually see the writing on the wall from a mile away, especially if the writing on the wall is something shitty. If that sounds terrible, it's because it kind of is, but it's kind of cool in its own way too. I mentioned in the previous episode that the podcast name actually has a lot to do with how it feels to live with these conditions. Well, what I just explained goes a little deeper into that. If you're at all like me, you probably live every day of your life waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maybe you're like me, and even when you can clearly see that you're driving towards a cliff, you just can't seem to bring yourself to hit the brakes because you hope that once you reach the cliff's edge, it'll just be a mirage. If you can relate to that feeling, then this is the podcast for you. And listen, I'm not going to tell you the other shoe isn't going to drop, because it probably will. And I'm not going to tell you the cliff is a mirage, because your boy flew off that cliff at about 100 miles per hour. This podcast isn't here to convince you that bad things aren't going to happen to you. It's here to convince you that you can survive them. And that it's kind of a neat little superpower to be able to go through all of those bad things and still always hope you're wrong.